All right, today's project for our Stage 3 1000 horsepower Forester is going to be adding power. So we're finally going to address the elephant in the room of how we're going to achieve our 1000 horsepower goal when our turbo is sized to around 800 850 horsepower. So in the last episode I alluded to us using more than one power adder, and the goal for this build, if it hasn't been clear from the start already, is I'm not out to set the fastest quarter mile time. I don't really care about drag racing. The goal for me is to see how far we can take these cars while still being streetable to a certain point. So obviously reliability, as horsepower goes up, reliability goes down. So we're not talking about a long-term build here, but it's relatively easy to go buy a huge turbo, slap it in the headlight space or down in the fog light mounted setup, and then use a standalone ECU to have a launch control and anti-lag, and basically not worry about the turbo lag kicking on until 6,000 RPMs because you're going to be drag racing it only. That would be miserable in the street. So our goal here is to get the best street turbo, which is, in my opinion and many others, the Precision 6466. We upsize the hot side to the 105 AR, which will allow us to make a little bit more peak power. So you could go with a 0.83, but with our 280-degree cams, we're already going to be pushing the power band to higher RPMs, so the 105 hot side will suit that better. So what we're going to do is get that turbo to make around 800, 850 horsepower, and that way it's not very laggy. You know, it should make boost early in the 4,000-ish RPM range. We're going to take this car to 8,000 to 9,000 RPMs, so we have a meaty power band. And then we are going to use a different power source to get us over to the final 4-figure mark. So finally, we will unveil what we've chosen to go with, and I will give you a little overview of this. So here it is. Some of you have guessed this in the comments. We are going with horsepower in a bottle. This is a Nitrous Express direct port system. Some of the things have already been opened, and I'll show you that soon. So basically, I'm going to run through this with you and kind of give you an outline of how Nitrous works and why we chose this kit. And then I've never installed one of these kits before on a Subaru, and we've had to do some background stuff that I'll show you soon. Basically, we're going to go through and I'm going to figure out how I want to install this and kind of document this part of the journey. So if anyone wants to do this at home, I will say that we have chosen to go with the direct port system, wet nitrous system, which is the most complicated way to do it, but I'm going to tell you now why we're choosing to do that. So this kit will look different to you if you have a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder, 10-cylinder, whatever. The nozzles will be mainly what changes and how many solenoids you have. So here you can see this is a nitrous solenoid, and the fuel solenoid is over here. They look identical, but one says nitrous out and one says fuel out. So let's talk real quick about wet systems versus dry systems and what nitrous does. So nitrous is sort of like a liquid supercharger, you could think, in a sense. It basically cools the air, which makes it more dense, and when the atomization happens, the nitrogen and oxygen molecules split, and the nitrogen is the expanding gas which forces the piston combustion down for more power, and oxygen obviously helps with the burn. So you wouldn't want to inject straight oxygen because that's extremely dangerous and can explode. Nitrous oxide is actually not flammable when it's in its bottle form. It has to split through atomization. So when you get these tanks filled, they freeze them, fill them, and then they don't actually work until about 950 psi, which is why you have to have these regulators and solenoids. When they're about 950 to 1,000-ish psi using a bottle warmer, when it gets injected into the engine, it will atomize and cause the reaction that we want. It's highly effective. The results are even better in a boosted application. So when you choose a wet system, that means that you are supplying additional fuel and nitrous oxide to the engine. However you're going to set it up, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you're using a dry system, that is just nitrous oxide. That is the easier way to go. It wasn't so common until more recently with more advanced engine management systems. Basically, you have to add more fuel when you have the nitrous, just like you would if you ran more boost. So you have to be able to have the fuel system capable of supplying the extra fuel and the engine management system to be able to control that when the nitrous hits. So if you have like an AEM or Motec or Haltech, they have nitrous up to 6-stage nitrous controllers built in. Most people don't have that, and also the bad thing about running that is that when your nitrous runs out, you're not going to have access to that power, which is understandable, but your car is tuned to make that extra power. So when you use a wet system, you have a nozzle. This is a Piranha nozzle. There's a couple different styles. You have a fuel and a nitrous coming in, and then jets go in here. So there's tables online to tell you what jet nozzles you need for each one based on your horsepower shot. This nozzle here can do anything from 50 horsepower to 250 horsepower, and those numbers are doubled or tripled when you add boost. So we're gonna use a 100 horsepower shot nozzles, but we're gonna gain over 200 horsepower with it with a boosted application. So what we are going to do, since I'm running the stock ECU and I don't want to use nitrous all the time, is we're going to have a fuel cell in the back holding 5 gallons of C16 alcohol or E85 or Ignite 114, we haven't decided yet, with its own fuel pump. That is going to run up to the nitrous solenoid for the fuel, the fuel solenoid, and that's going to meter the fuel in one nozzle and then the nitrous in the other nozzle. That way, when the nitrous is armed and ready, the fuel system is only sized for the power it makes without it, and then the nitrous comes with its own fuel to keep your air-fuel ratio where you want. So it's a little bit confusing. I'm just kind of briefly running over it. If you want to know more about it, Nitrous Express's website is really good. They show you how to install it, what type of kit, and whatnot. So now we're going to move on to the installation. A lot of cars, especially V8s, come with plates that you can put between the throttle body, which have an inlet for fuel and an inlet for nitrous, and then it mists into the throttle body. That is the easiest way to do it. You just buy the plate, you run the lines to it, and you go. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that each valve or each runner of the intake will get this exact same amount of nitrous and fuel, but if you're not running a really large shot for a lot of power, it might not matter. When you want to do the most precise method, that's called direct port injection, which means that one of these nozzles directly is in the intake tract or somewhere between the throttle body and the head, and the ratio is exactly the same in all 4 cylinders because it's metered with these distribution blocks and the solenoids. So that's what we're doing. So here's our Corsa Veloce intake manifold. This is obviously not meant for nitrous. However, there's no room in the TGVs on my car to do it because of the turbo inlet that comes in right here. If you didn't have that, you could use TGVs and drill them in the center on the inside of all 4, and it would distribute to evenly along the runner. So the next option is we need to get nitrous in each one of these ports. Obviously, I don't want to just drill in this very expensive manifold and have these nozzles sitting out everywhere. This would make it easier to just plop them up top there, and then you can see the 90-degree spray goes down into the runner, but that's going to look ugly. So on this manifold, there's actually 4 flat spots underneath. These have velocity stacks on the inside, and then there's a flat spot underneath here. And these are meant to have holes underneath them anyways for all your other things. So I have already had this drilled for these nitrous nozzles. Let me spin this around, trying to keep this thing clean. So you can see here, flat spots here, 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 and here. If you look inside of this, there's velocity stacks here and here on each of these. So I have had these machine shop drill these holes centered in the runner, not on the flat spot, which is why it looks off, but it's centered in the runner. So this nozzle can thread down in, and when it's tightened up, the jet points at a 90, and then these 2 valves on the intake will get the same distribution, and it'll be distributed all the way around. They're also hidden under here. They don't even stick up as high as your second fuel pump pressure switch, your boost switch, and the other ones. So I've already had these drilled, and you can see inside here, it might be too dark, but there's velocity stacks in there. So now what we're gonna do is clean this manifold out because it was drilled, and then we're gonna set them up and I'll show you how it looks. All right, so I washed the manifold out with water and then dried it out with air as you just saw, and then I kind of went through and just wiped the inside a little bit. So we're not gonna be able to get everything done today because I just realized that I don't have a tubing bender for that small. But what we can do is get the nozzles in, get them oriented right so that we can look down in there, and then we'll put the throttle body on, the big bore throttle body, and get that sealed up, and then that way less chance of any contaminants getting in. And I have the sensors that need to go in here, but these things take up like 1.5 of the holes, and so I had to order plugs for those, and the plugs need to go in first and then you can thread those in. So Nitrous Express says to not use Teflon tape on the nozzles even though they're 1/16 NPT. I think they're worried about it getting in the intake track, so they said to use thread locker. So we're going to use orange thread locker, which is high temp but removable. And we're going to thread these until they're snug, and then we're going to make sure that the jet is running downstream and centered. And then after that, we get the tubing bender in, we can mount the solenoids and kind of bend the tubing and put the nozzles in. The chart's online that I'll show you guys later. So I'm going to get the thread sealant, and then we're going to thread these in and then probably open up the rest of the kit and see what we got and kind of make sure that we have everything we need. Orange thread locker. It's not going to need much because it doesn't go into the manifold that far, but we don't want them to leak, so I'm gonna, plus it's gonna have time to dry since we're not driving this car right away. I'm gonna put some on there, and then we are going to thread these in, and we're gonna have to try to make sure that they're all about evenly spaced height-wise. I'm not sure that it would matter because it's gonna be pretty highly compressed air, but for the sake of making it even, we're going to. And I noticed that on these nozzles, the side that the runner that says fuel is the one that has the notch facing on it, although we could look inside and check. So that one is in and facing downstream. There's 3 threads showing on the inside, so let's try another one and then we'll see if we want to go farther, or 3 threads inside is good. This intake is obviously not meant for nitrous nozzle to be drilled here, so the material is kind of thin. So you definitely don't want to crank it really hard and cut the 1 or 2 threads that are actually in the manifold. So you kind of got to play the game of tight but not ridiculous, and also make sure that the nozzles are centered with the tubing and not with the intake. So the intake is straight this way, but the tubing goes at an angle, so you want to make sure that those are straight in the nozzle. That one has 3 threads as well. Try this side. That one went in farther than the other ones before it gets tight. I don't want to thread it in too far. That one has, okay, so that one has 3 as well, but it was not a lot of resistance till the end there. So let me get the 4th one in, and then we'll decide whether we want to turn them all an additional turn or leave them there. I don't think they're gonna leak, but we will be running a fair amount of boost through here. It's also a shame to have to drill this manifold, but there was no way to make it work in the TGVs unless I had the turbo pipes redone, and we already welded the elbow onto the turbo, and it wouldn't have been worth it to do that just to put it in the TGVs. This can always be plugged if you don't want to use this nitrous nozzles. Okay, they're all in. Yeah, I don't think we want to go any tighter with those. We'll let the thread locker lock. They're pretty tough. So that's what it looks like with them in. So they will be hidden. This goes towards the back of the motor, so technically the view from the front of the engine would be like this. So you can barely see them hanging down, which is nice. Then we're going to put some 90s on them, and actually I think we're going to try to set the solenoids right here, since the power steering alternator and AC pump will kind of cover this, and then stay out of the way of the back of the manifold. But this is a good location because there's plenty of room for the 3 sensors we need to run under here. We're waiting on the map sensor since the new throttle body doesn't have a provision for it. So this one goes here. I got an adapter. This one will go here, and then the map sensor, and then we'll plug the other holes. And that's plenty enough room. So I'm going to go get the throttle body. We're going to put that on for the final time and try to keep some dust out of here. Okay, so this throttle body is not a traditional one. This one has an O-ring, so you're going to put the O-ring in here. When you buy the throttle body from IAG, it comes with an adapter bracket to go to stock manifold or Process West. But I had this intake custom made through Six Star Motorsports, but they had called Corsa Veloz and had this manifold drilled specifically for this throttle body, so that there is no adapter brackets, because I don't like that. So these are direct built in with this throttle body, and then I believe they added it as an option to the website now after I ordered this one. So I think that if you were to go to Six Star Motorsports now, you could get the Corsa Veloz manifold configured this way. They're all handmade and made to order. They usually don't have stock in them. They come from Australia, and they take like 3 months to come in. So when you order it the way you want to with the throttle body that you want, and then there's no issues. The only thing is you gotta drill out your factory cover from your factory throttle body, at least for this manifold, and then I think it's 3/16 rivets, rivet it back on. I haven't done that yet. So we are going to tighten these bolts up, and then throttle body is on. I will rivet that cover on later, but at least this will keep material from getting in the throttle body. I took it off when I got drilled because I didn't want it to get in the mechanisms in here and get in their way. It's good now. So these throttle bodies don't have map ports on them anymore. They do have the throttle body coolant hose ports, which we plug anyways, but they don't have an adapter for a map sensor, so you run it underneath the manifold. There's always provisions on the aftermarket manifold, so that's just part of running it that way. It doesn't really matter if it's here or in the manifold. It's actually kind of nicer to do it in the manifold because you don't have to buy. So if you wanted to run an AEM 5-bar map sensor like we are, you'd have to buy for a stock car, you'd have to buy an adapter bracket, which would bolt into this one at an angle, and you'd thread that in and then connect it. With this manifold now, they come with 8th NPT threads on the AEM sensor, so it just threads right in. Which is nice. I'm just snugging these up. These are not the factory bolts, so I don't know if the factory torque spec would work, but I'm just gonna tighten them up how I feel. All right. So now we can open this nitrous kit and see what we have. Move that bottle back. there's instructions for wiring these things up, but there's not really good instructions for how they go. I'm pretty sure this is a simple kit, but if you've never done it before, there's a lot of random fittings and whatnot, so we kind of need to figure out what we've got here. So this pipe is to go from the solenoids to the actual nozzles. These are the jets. So you can order special ones, but I think they come with a bunch. I don't know if they'll have the exact ones we need, but they're labeled on the nozzle. I don't know if you can see that, but that one says 31. And they kind of set in the jets, so we'll have to pick out which ones we need from the chart. These are the distribution blocks, so when your solenoid out will have one of these. I think you can thread it directly into here, like nitrous out, and then you'll have your 4 lines go into the injector for the nitrous portion, and then the fuel solenoid, which is here, will have the same distribution block with packaging is nice, but it's hard not to cut it. So this one is fuel, so fuel out, and then fuel in, purge. We do need to order the purge kits. So this will have 4 out for fuel, 4 out for nitrous. Save those nozzles. This has got the flare in there for the tubing. And then I believe these are adapters, wiring stuff, and then these lines. This line is to take the nitrous from the bottle onto the car and into the solenoid. So I think this adapter here goes into the nitrous in. Should be 8th NPT fitting going in, and then this is a 3AN. Yeah, that's right. So that's how we'll feed the solenoid from the nitrous bottle, and then this will be hidden under the manifold with the power and ground, and this will have the 4 lines going out to the nozzles. All right, so that makes sense. So what we're missing is, and I don't know why, so I ordered different AN line to go supply the fuel, since we're going to be doing that, but we're also going to need an adapter. Oh wait, I ordered that separately. So we're using a -4 AN for the fuel because they don't really make -3 for regular AN line, because this is like a brake size. So we're going to go from the regulator, reducing it to -4, and then when it comes up to here, I have a 4 AN to 8th NPT adapter going in, and then from out we'll have these. These fittings should thread into here like that. Yep. They go like that, all 4 of them, and then the tubing will come out, and we're going to try to bend those super nice. I ordered a tight radius bender. And then you got your relay and stuff. We're actually not going to be using this wiring portion because we have we're using the Maximizer 5 progressive controller. So that's another part to the system that makes it more complicated, but it'll actually be able to ramp in the nitrous over a period of time and when certain conditions are met. So throttle percentage, boost percentage, fuel pressure, there's like 5 different ways you can monitor it. So and then this is how you mount the bottle up. So we got a bunch more to go on this, but basically this is just kind of running through the kit that we got, unveiling that we are in fact running nitrous, which is pretty cool. You know, we all watched Fast and the Furious. Obviously it doesn't feel like that in the car, but this is a big ass bottle. It's 15-pounder, and with the supplemental fuel we should be able to make at least 200 more horsepower to get us to that 1,000 wheel mark. So I am going to pick up this video when I get the tube bender in, and then we'll start mocking up the manifold. But in the meantime, this thing is looking pretty good. Machine Shop did a great job drilling those. They bit nice and hard without having to turn them in too much, and they look really sleek under there. Okay, went to McMaster and got the plugs that we needed for the intake. So this is the quarter NPT plug. This is an adapter to use one of the quarters down to an 1/8, and then the other 2/8 plugs. So we're going to plug one of these, and one of these, and then this other big one will get an adapter since all the gauges are 1/8 NPT. The map sensor from AEM is also 1/8. So since this is the shortest connector, we're probably going to put this one in the middle since it'll stick down the farthest. It's a lot shorter than that one, and the map sensor I think is going to be a little bit bigger as well. So we're going to put these plugs in and then put the manifold back on the block, and then we'll start looking at the fuel lines and the harness setup. Okay, so this should be almost everything for the manifold. This last port is for the AEM 5-bar map sensor. So you can see this one, it's a 1/4 inch NPT. This is an 1/8 inch gauge, so I got the adapter in there. And then this is the boost pressure gauge for the gauge in the car. This is the pressure switch for the second fuel pump. That'll be the AEM 5-bar map sensor, and then the 4 nitrous nozzles. So now we can go set this back on the car, and then we're gonna probably have to mock up the wiring harness and start laying in and making the fuel lines. Since we're gonna use 1/2 inch fuel lines, we need to make sure we have enough clearance everywhere and start kind of piecing this manifold setup together. Manifold is on, plenty of clearance. I turned this clamp down just so I'd have more room for that plug, but we got plenty of room under there. So now it's time to start building out the fuel system. Make sure we have room for the rails and the fittings in line, and then lay the wiring harness in top here so that when we start bending these, we can only do that one time, so we don't lose the integrity. Also put the oil pressure gauge on. You can move the stock pressure switch to that back port if you want to, but if you have the gauge, there's really no point. So we have a ton of fittings and lines from Vibrant, a whole box of goodies. Because of the complexity with the nitrous system, we now have to run a second fuel pressure regulator, which is this one, which will be a Magna Fuel. This is kind of designed to run returnless, sort of for our application. So this is the fuel injection map, they say. So you would basically run it, so even though there's 2 inputs and a return, the second input can be an output. So we're going to basically run it this way. We'll have a return go back to the fuel cell, and then output will go to the solenoid. This one also does up to 85 PSI with the 1-to-1 boost increase. So this is the ticket here. But we've got a lot of fittings. We have to have adapter fittings for all those. We have to have adapter fittings for the fuel cell. We have to have fittings for the rails. And now we're going to run 1/2 inch PTFE lines. So this is 10 foot of PTFE. I usually don't do PTFE because it's a huge pain in the neck to work with, and it's not as flexible. However, it's better for smells, it's stronger, and the line is smaller. So like that 1/2 inch PTFE line is about the same size as a -6 of the regular AN line. So when we're working with tight spaces and everything and big fuel lines, it was worth it. I did increase the elbows to Vibrant's high flow hose. So these are way bigger than normal 90s. Let me take one out here. Not only is it 1/2 inch instead of -6, but the high flow fittings are huge, as you can see. So we're going to start mocking these up and maybe cut the first set of lines to get the split under there and start mapping out where everything's going to go. But these are basically going to sit like this. This way we have no fuel restrictions going into these rails. These are 1/2 inch rails, 1/2 inch lines, all 1/2 inch fittings and over. In case you're doing fuel rails like this, this is the fitting you're going to need. This is a -8 flare by -8 straight cut with O-ring, which is basically called an O-ring boss. So all the fuel rails that I know of use an O-ring boss coming out of them, and then you convert it to an AN male. So you're going to put some lubricant on this O-ring. This is going to thread into the rail right here, and then it converts to take an AN fitting, and then our AN 90s will screw right into this. So I'm going to put all these in and throw the 90s on, and then I'll show you.
Look at the old Dash 6 lines compared to the Dash 8 high flows. This did 700 horsepower. This should be more than enough. So this is my old fuel line. I was just seeing how I mocked it up before and comparing the differences. Remember I told you this is a Dash 6 line, but it's the same size as the Dash 8 PTFE because this is a regular hose. So on my old system, I had the flex content sensor before the regulator because I had read some places that it was a good place to put it. But after doing more research, IAG and other big companies that have done a lot of research with these cars, they usually put it off of the return of the regulator. So that kind of works for me too, because those sensors are only in a Dash 6. So we would have to come off of a fuel rail with a Dash 8 and then step down to a Dash 6 for the sensor and over to the fuel pressure regulator. But on the other side of the rail, it would be Dash 8 all the way, so it'd kind of be uneven. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have it come in with the Dash 8 splitter right here, and that sits up under there like that. So it's going to have half-inch coming in, then it's going to split, then they're going to go to the front of the rails like all the kits do, and we're going to do parallel, or yeah, we're going to do parallel. They really don't have to be the same length because they're pressurized, but if you're in here and you're doing it, you might as well. So it's going to come in, they're going to go to the front of both the rails, Dash 8, they're going to come out of the rails, Dash 8, and then the regulator this time is going to be over here. Once they go into the regulator, they'll step down to a Dash 6, and then out of the regulator, the return, it'll go to the flex fuel kit, which is a Dash 6, and then out to the tank, which is Dash 6. So that seems to be the best way that everything stays the right size. Coming in and all the fuel into and out of the rails to the regulator is all half-inch. Then the regulator steps it down to a Dash 6, and the return is a Dash 6 already, which means that this won't impede any flow being a Dash 6. So I think that's the way to go. I'm going to maybe mock up the T and these first few lines and get those cut. We won't do the return lines until we're sure where we're going to put the regulator, because you kind of have to cut those to length. Like it's going to be over here. This fitting might actually be spun this way because the regulator might be right here, so it might just have a little thing. But we'll get the feed in with those and then lay the harness down, and that will make sure that we have enough room for our nitrous tubing. Alright, so I've got the harness laid in, and I put the power steering pump loosely on because this is going to be the tightest spot of the whole thing. This is where it starts getting confusing and complicated because we have so many monitoring systems on this car. So we have oil pressure, or excuse me, oil temperature switch right there, oil pressure switch, boost pressure switch for the second fuel pump, boost pressure for the gauge, and then the AEM gauge over there. So all these extra things have to go in, plus the flex fuel kit has connectors on it, and then on the fuel pressure regulator is the fuel pressure monitor for that. So that uses the TGV plugs. So the left side TGV uses it uses the 3-prong plug right there, and that one goes to the fuel pressure sensor, where if it drops fuel pressure, it'll pull timing or cut power. And then on this side, the TGV connector is used for the flex fuel kit because it usually hides back there. So I just started plugging up all the lines, hooking everything up to see where it wants to lay. Usually what we do is we assemble the motor, we build up the TGVs, then we do the harness, and we will actually zip tie this to the expansion tank and really get this thing like down and packed as much as possible so that it looks neat and tidy. We'll fix up any electrical tape, try to make it look clean, and then instead of this running over top of the factory one, we usually tuck these anyways, and since we don't have that factory inlet, this is going to sit right here, and then this fuel line is going to snake right through there and go under the tubing and over. So that's why I was just setting the piece of tubing we have in there. There's some flexibility with that coupler down there in between here, so we have a little bit of room. There's a gap under there, so that's where we're going to run the fuel line. But that's why I went with the PTFE line, because it's nice and slim and it can kind of fit. It doesn't bend that easy, but it'll kind of follow this along and go up to the splitter. And then on this side we have a bit more room to come over. We have plenty of room on the back. It really, the tightest part of this whole thing is right here, and then it looks like there's going to be plenty enough room for our nitrous tubing. The solenoids might be a little tight, but we should be able to kind of fit the solenoids in here and have the lines come over. That's the plan as of now. We also have some real estate over here behind the AC compressor. We might actually be able to stack all 3 solenoids right along there. That could be pretty clean since this is the most open part of the engine bay. So yeah, I'm just kind of taking my time, hooking everything up, seeing where everything goes, and we should be good to go. I'm trying to think of any other hiccups. I don't know if I'm going to get to cut these lines right now, but I'll put it in the next clip. When I do, I might just start connecting these connectors and get this zip tied down for now. Alright, so I just put that on time lapse because we've done timing kits a million times. The only thing different about this motor is because it's a high horsepower build, every one of the timing component bolts was Loctited, and then obviously this is different than normal. I can tell this works already though by how tight the belt is without even pulling this pin yet. Normally there's a fair bit of slack over here on this belt and it's already pretty tight. So this thing's definitely going to work. What we'll do is we'll pull the pin, and then usually I put a screwdriver or a pry bar and just pressurize some tension to make sure it's going to work, and then we'll turn the motor over a few times. But for right now we got to adjust the timing belt guides. So we made this tool that slides in, and it's got an offset notch to work with AVCS, and basically this is set to the exact factory spec. So when you want to adjust your belt guide, rather than measuring it with feeler gauges, you just slide this in like this. The notch fits right around there. You push down on the belt guide and then you snug it up. These don't come in timing kit, that's why we made one. We can put these up for sale if you're interested, but it sets it exactly to the factory spec all the way around so that you know that it's not going to touch the belt. It works on AVCS and non-AVCS cars, so you don't need to buy separate ones. That's why it has the pull tab on one side. So you just go through, set these up, tighten them with an Allen wrench. There you go. Set to factory spec, and then there's one over here as well. You put your finger in the center of the guide when you're tightening, it'll make sure that the edges tighten evenly. That's it. And then for the center, this is an IAG one. This has a tight gap to it already, so you just kind of pull this one up, but we can make one for the center as well if you don't have one from a Gates kit. We don't use Gates timing kits, we use Aisin, so I got one from a friend a while back and I've just kept it. So now that everything's timed, I will pull the pin and pressurize it, and then I'll let the cam gear holder go. We'll put the crank pulley on, the bolt at least, and turn it over a few times. I actually have a socket adapter, so I don't have to do the crank pulley, so we're probably going to do that. I'll show you guys when it's done, when it's timed up and tightened. Alright, so I turned it over 3 or 4 times, double checked timing. Everything's good. Obviously they won't line up exactly perfect all the time if you've had your heads decked, so these are the slightest bit over, but all the timing marks line up. And this belt is very, very tight, so that is pretty awesome improvement. If you watch some of our other videos, generally there's some good play on this belt, and this is with pretty hard force pushing down. There's a lot of tension on there, so this should hold some pretty high RPMs with in combination with this holder, these adjusted properly, and the Roger Clark high grip tensioner. So I'm pleased with that. I'm gonna take some pictures, throw the AVCS oil covers over these, and probably put the timing cover on, and then on to more nitrous stuff. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up today's video. We kind of outlined what we said we were going to do. We laid in the engine harness, mapped out where the fuel system is going to go, finished all the plugs on the intake manifold for the nitrous kit and nozzles. So I'm going to wrap this up here. It's now fully timed through the crank pulley on. I don't know if I got that on video, but this is a fluid damper pulley we run for high RPMs. So in the next video, we're going to attempt to bend the nitrous piping, get the solenoids mocked in place, and probably finish the fueling system, at least from the feed underneath the motor. The return system and the regulator we might wait to do in the car. The clutch looks like it's going to be delayed a little bit farther, so really we can't do much more until we get the clutch in, because we're going to put the motor in without the intake and the turbo on, but we can get the fuel lines mocked up and a few other things. And then depending on how long the next video is, we're going to have my friend Kyle come over and start wiring in the other goodies we have for the nitrous. And that being said, there's a couple more parts that are going to be coming in tomorrow or the day after that you'll see in the next video, either to kind of complete the nitrous setup. As far as I know, that'll be everything we need so we can get it installed and ready. That way when the motor comes in, we can fire it right up and break it in and then start tuning. So that's going to wrap up this video, guys. Thanks for staying tuned. Might sprinkle in some rally car build footage. We're getting some progress on there. Pin stands have been made. We're waiting on approval from ARA for the new cage design, and then I might swing up there as they start bending some tubes. So until the next time, thanks.